You are listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with Steve Worsley, the toxic mold expert and your number one source for mold consulting and mitigation in the USA. Let's dive into a brand new episode. Before we get started on this episode, here's a not so short disclaimer. While all attempts have been made to verify the content provided in this podcast, neither the podcaster or the producers assume any responsibility for errors, omissions, or alternative interpretations of the issues discussed here. All information stated in this podcast is the opinion of Steve Worsley. Steve Worsley is a mold specialist with over 25 years of experience in the construction and mold industry. The Toxic Mold Podcast is for information sharing purposes only. The views expressed are those of the podcaster and his alone. These views should not be taken as expert instruction or commands. While there may be references to medical conditions and symptoms, all podcast episodes are the opinion of Steve Worsley, and any medical questions or concerns shall be addressed with the appropriate licensed medical professional or professionals. As the podcaster refers to different mold types, please be aware that Steve Worsley is not a microbiologist, and questions concerning mold specifics should be answered by the appropriate professional. Steve isn't, nor does he offer any legal advice. For any legal advice, you must speak with a lawyer. The listener is 100% responsible for his or her own actions. You can check out Steve's books on Amazon. Just go to Amazon and search for author Steve Worsley. You can also take Steve's courses on Udemy or Skillshare, and you can find out more about those at cnccontractorservices.com. Now, let's get to the episode.
Hello, you're listening to the Toxic Mold Podcast with myself, Steve Worsley, and we have my wife, Cassandra. How are you doing?
Good. How's it going?
It's October, middle of October.
It is.
Kind of crazy, huh?
Yeah, almost the end of the year.
Well, I want to thank all of our listeners for listening to the podcast. We're on episode 280.
Oh, wow. Almost 300.
Yep. It'll be, well, I guess 300 next year. So kind of crazy to think. So we appreciate all you listeners. This is why we do it. Today's topic is something that I get asked all the time. And the subject is the pros and cons of buying a new home. So why do you think we're talking about that?
I think because a lot of people feel about mold the way that I feel about mice. I find one in the house and I'm packing boxes because we're leaving.
Well, that's an interesting answer because, one of the most common things I get is the question, do we have to just leave our home? And, a lot of times that is a loaded question. Like, that's not something I get to decide. But my answer every time, or my statement, or what I tell the clients is moving into a new home doesn't mean you're going to just get away from mold. No, because there's a lot that you don't control, whether you move into a new home, you stay in the current home. There's a lot of history there that you know nothing about. Exactly. And, we've talked about it before, but I've had clients on brand new homes that have mold concerns. I mean, it hasn't even been finished built. No carpet, no flooring, and there's a mold issue. And I guess my point is it seems logical to just say, hey, I'm going to, move into a new home. And when I'm talking about new homes, not new to our listeners, a brand new home. Like brand new, they're the first people to live in the house. Exactly. Okay. Brand new built. And, it's just, like I said, you could be running to another problem. So it's not always just that easy to just say, hey, let's go buy a new home. Well, no. And, John Kabat-Zinn, who was the father of mindfulness, said, wherever you go, there you are. So you're also taking all your bad moisture intrusion causing habits with you to a new home. So it's not just that you don't know who built the new home or whether they thought about mold in building the new home. It's also that if you were doing things in the old home that contributed to moisture intrusion and mold, you will bring those habits unless you correct them to the new home. Exactly. Yeah, one of the things about a new home is you think or assume that there's no defects. And, at least having a home that's, whether it's 20 years old or 2 years old, for the most part, you're going to start seeing how poorly or how well built the home was. And I guess my point is on a new home, you're not going to see those defects right off the bat like you would in an older home.
And you certainly won't see the defects more than likely if it's going to lead to mold before the warranty, which I think typically for a new home lasts a year.
Correct.
So the warranty, you won't figure out the stuff that's going to go wrong until the warranty is done.
Yeah, good luck. As far as, I'm not saying all builders are this way, but good luck getting the builder to fix something too for the warranty. It's, even if you do discover them, I'm not saying they won't, but it's usually like pulling teeth to get that done. So it's, like I said, it's a tricky question. It's a loaded question. Like buying a new home, is that going to fix the problems? And, we talked about this, it's been a couple months ago, and you mentioned it just a little bit. You're not leaving your old habits at the old home. A lot of times, this is something I deal with quite often. The deeper I dig, when I have a client that says they want to buy a new home, usually it's, one of the people wants to be in a new home. They just don't like their home. And I guess my point is there's other motives that want them to move into a new home. Maybe that, they just hate the home that they're in just for whatever reasons. And I guess what I'm saying is sometimes at the end of the day, it doesn't have everything to do with mold. It's just that's what they want. They want a new home.
Absolutely. And I also think it's important to separate the moving into a new home versus moving into a different geographic location. I think I've seen lots of blogs where people write about their mold journey and they say, I moved from, humid Houston or swampy New Orleans and I moved to Sedona. Dry. And moving from one kind of climate to another actually helped their autoimmune issues, helped their mold sickness issues. I think people have to separate the why are you moving?
Yeah.
If you're moving because the altitude's too much for you in that area or because it's too moist. And you know what I mean? It's not just about the house. It's also about, and this is why having a doctor that you're working with that you trust becomes important because you have to figure out what really is causing your issues if it's mold sickness.
Yeah, because geographic locations, we're dealing with these hurricanes down in Florida and North Carolina and pretty much the Southeast. And, I said this to you. I'm like, I don't know why anyone would want to live in Florida. And, I saw something on the news the other day. They were interviewing a couple and he said, this is the price we pay to live in paradise. You have to deal with hurricanes. But it makes sense what you're saying. Like you can move from a very humid, geographic location, come out west like where we're at. And, because it's dry, you think that it's going to help. And a lot of times, going to what you said about the doctor, I talk to my clients about this all the time. Like, sometimes it's not just the mold. And, that bucket is, 99% full and then you get exposed to mold and then that bucket's overflowing. Moving, psychologically would obviously help. And then maybe from that point, it does other things with your body. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And also I think mold sickness is such a serious thing because of all of the other downstream effects in terms of your health that you also have to decide in what environment can you heal.
Right.
Some people just don't want to stay in a moldy home because they don't feel safe in that home. It doesn't really have as much to do with the physical condition of that home or the next home as it is they're like, I just don't trust that I can heal in this home. And starting from scratch psychologically helps them feel like they can heal in the next.
Right.
But to your point, I don't know that solves the actual issue at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I mean by that is, sometimes, it's underlying issues. We've talked about this before. Like, it's a really tough journey for our listeners that are experiencing mold sickness. It's very difficult for them if they have a spouse or a loved one or anyone close to them that doesn't believe in it. And if you can't get buy-in, and I'm not saying everybody has to think the same, but if you can't get buy-in from, let's say it's your spouse, maybe at the end of the day, it's not really just a mold issue that's causing those problems with your spouse. It could be many other problems. And the mold is, the easiest thing that you can see and blame. But, going back to the topic, so in your opinion, what would be the pros of buying a new home?
I think the psychological safety part
Right.
You're starting from scratch. You feel like you can begin again. You feel like you're in an environment that doesn't have all of the memories of how sick you got in the previous home.
Yeah.
If it's a brand new home, I would assume that everything was built well, which is not necessarily the truth. But I would assume that I'm the only person who's ever done anything in this home. So I know everything that's been done to the home because I'm the first person to live in it.
Yeah. Yeah, which is very, it's logical to think that way. But on the other hand, there are the cons of just buying a new home.
Mm-hmm. Because you don't know if the builder really thought through how they were going to build that house. You don't know this is why having a custom builder, if you're really wanting a brand new home, makes a lot more sense in mold situations, because you can say to a custom builder, I want this, this, and this, and it needs to be like this because you've done all your homework. Now, they still could not do that, but you'd have a higher likelihood of, as one of your books talks about, building a mold-resistant home with a custom builder who you say, this is all the things I want, than going to some cookie cutter track home, spec home builder who just randomly built several homes.
Yeah. Well, and those track home builders, they're just, it's quantity, not quality.
Correct. They're just slapping it together and moving on to the next one.
Exactly. But on the other hand, too, going back to a custom home builder, if you go to that contractor and that contractor doesn't think mold's a concern.
Correct.
Then you're just fighting that battle the whole time. When you're saying, I don't want new carpet, or I don't want carpet, I'd rather put, tile or LVP or whatever, that contractor could already be poo-pooing everything you're saying away, and they're just rolling their eyes behind your back. And at the end of the day, they're not for you. And it's similar to having, a spouse or a family member that's just not for you. But one thing, for our listeners, going into a brand new home, it might not be mold issues that you're dealing with. And what we see a lot is the VOCs.
Oh, yeah.
And, you have a new home. So you have fresh paint, you have stains, glues from putting the subfloor down, glues if you put linoleum down, all sorts of VOCs that you don't really think about. You move into the new home and you're still sick, and you just naturally assume it's your body trying to detox the mold. But a lot of times it's the VOCs are just overruling everything and, causing all sorts of problems.
No, that makes sense. You also don't know what the land upon which the new home was built formerly was if you didn't do your homework. Like, was it a
old
plant? Was it a like Poltergeist? Was it a burial ground? I mean, you don't actually know what was on it before that subdivision or home was on it, and what is in the soil that could impact the air quality of the home.
Yeah, and I mean, like speaking of soils, another thing apart from mold is radon. And, a lot of people aren't aware of that. In January, that's Radon Awareness Month. So we talk about radon. But like you said, they could have built this over an old dump, an old chemical.
Yeah, you don't know.
It could have been anything. Plus, on top of that, you have the EMFs, too, you got to worry about.
Oh, completely. So, I mean, I guess my question for you, though, is there are people who'll say to you, we just can't stay here. My son's sick, my daughter's sick, I'm sick, we're sick. We have got to move, and we need to find a place. But then their follow-up question to you is, but can I take my stuff with me? Do I really have to throw it all away?
Yeah.
What's your take on people who move into a new home, bringing all or some of the moldy stuff from the old home to the new home?
I think that, my take and my opinion on it's going to probably differ from a lot of our listeners. The cross-contamination side of things is obviously a big deal. So I'm not saying that can't happen. You can be bringing the mold and the mycotoxins from your old home that were in your old mattress or your sofa or whatever. You bring it into your new home, clothes, stuffed animals, all sorts of things. You could be bringing those mycotoxins and mold into the new home. But on the other hand, and this is where a lot of our listeners might not agree with me, the cross-contamination side is very important. But if you're bringing, let's just say, now mycotoxins, I think that's a whole different animal to attack. But as far as mold spores, bringing mold spores in a sofa or stuffed animals or whatever into a new home, those mold spores have to have the right conditions to colonize, become viable, and if they're toxigenic, to create mycotoxins. So you'd have to bring those things into a new home. The humidity's got to be 60% for 24 to 48 hours. You would have to have that in order for it to start colonizing, growing, and then produce the mycotoxins and release them. And I guess my point is cross-contamination is a concern. It's a big concern with mycotoxins, but on the other hand, I think it gets blown out of proportion. And our listeners are going to be like, well, Steve, you've said you have to throw everything away. Well, that's because that's the easiest thing for me to tell you. Like, I'm not telling you that because you have to. Like, if it was us moving and we had mold and mycotoxin concerns, there's a lot of things that we would salvage that I could treat and HEPA vacuum and do things with. So to answer your question, yeah, you could be bringing those mycotoxins into your new home, which is a big concern. But those mycotoxins are not capable of reproducing and increasing the number of the mycotoxins. Does that make sense?
It does, and I'd just start fresh. Like,
yeah.
All of it goes away. Or all of it goes into a storage unit, move into the new house, and then little by little bring the stuff back and give it a week or so to see if there's any reaction.
Yeah.
That would take forever, and that'd be expensive, but that's how I'd want to do it.
Yeah, and there's decontamination methods. You could dedicate, maybe a garage or a shed or, like you said, a storage unit. There are things you could do. And like you said, it would make more sense to slowly bring things in. Everybody reacts differently to mold and mycotoxin exposure. So some of our listeners, they might not see a reaction to, let's say, bringing a bed in. They might not see that reaction for several days versus somebody else might see that reaction that day. Does that make sense?
No, that totally makes sense. And I also think that, anything that spends most of its time close to your physical body is probably something, from my perspective, I would think of not bringing into like a mattress.
Right.
You spend too many hours on that mattress asleep to not get a new one in a new home.
Exactly. And, it's easy for me to say it this way, but a new mattress, you can probably get a new mattress for, $1,500. There are things, when I talk to my clients, there's a few major things you don't want to take with you. A mattress is one, a couch or a love seat, any furniture that's porous, like a fabric couch, and then stuffed animals. Those are like the three main, like I always say, just throw them away. Beyond that, though, you can assess everything one by one and, make your decisions based on that.
Absolutely. So what's your call to action for people?
So for our listeners that think that because they found a mold concern in their home, don't just make a life-changing decision and sell that home and go buy, even if it's not a brand new home, don't just make that quick decision because you could be putting yourself into another home that has mold issues, even if it's brand new.
Okay.
And we talk about, my first book, The Mold Epidemic. Like you said, I've written 5 books, Building a Mold-Resistant Home, Black Mold and Home Inspections, the case study book. There's plenty of books that I have, and they're all available. All of them are in paperback. A couple of them are hardback, or at least the latest one.
I think so. And here's one call to action. Go to cnccontractorservices.com if you're in this place of trying to think about should you move, when should you move, how should you move. That warrants a mold consult, don't you think?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, they can go to our website and there's a link there, but, we have consultations, we have digital bundles, we have the books. All our books are available on Amazon. Like I said, they're in paperback, hardback, Audible, and ebook.
An ebook. And if, you're concerned about mold and especially about mycotoxins, we have a digital product, the Mycotoxin Prevention Kit. Learn about it so you know what you're dealing with.
Exactly. Yeah, there's, like you said, if they go to our website, there's plenty of services and options available. So I appreciate all you listeners for listening. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure you go to our website at cnccontractorservices.com and sign up for the mold investigation checklist. Again, go to cnccontractorservices.com and get your free mold investigation checklist today. You can also on cnccontractorservices.com find out more about Steve's courses and books and consultations. Once again, go to cnccontractorservices.com.